Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now, here's your host, Roxanne Derhodge.
Hi, everyone. It's Roxanne Derhodge. Thanks for tuning in again this week. This week I have an honored guest, Traci Cipriano, and she has quite the combination of skills, I would say. She is a former lawyer and a psychologist, and she's just recently released a new book. So Traci, tell us the name of the book, and it was released in July, and where people can get it.
Sure. It's The Thriving Lawyer, a multidimensional model of well-being for a sustainable legal profession. And it's really available from any bookseller. You can find it online from Amazon, any other bookseller online. You can ask your bookstore to purchase it. I have a website, thethrivinglawyerbook.com. You can go there and click on a link if you want.
Awesome.
It's published by Routledge. I didn't publish it myself. It's published by Routledge, but I have links to sellers.
Okay, awesome. So let's now that's quite I would say there's a lot of skills that you would have used as a lawyer, but now you're a psychologist. So
yeah,
help me understand the path that you took, Traci, to kind of initially you were legal, and then now you've stepped over, and I know you're also teaching at the clinical professor at Yale School of Medicine. So tell me about your path.
Sure.
That you decided to take these two routes.
My interests have always been in psychology, law, policy, health, and I initially took the law school route. I thought I could, bring change about in the world as a lawyer, and there were things I really enjoyed about law. I enjoyed the research and writing and legal analysis, problem solving, crafting, good arguments, but there were things about the day-to-day practice I didn't enjoy, and I eventually decided that I wanted to take the leap and return to graduate school for psychology. I'm a relational person. I'm very interested in what makes people tick, what's going on, what motivates people. And so I returned to graduate school for clinical psychology, and I haven't looked back. It was difficult to make that leap, but then once I did, it's been terrific. But I think my legal training helps me to work with lawyers because I fully understand. I understand how they think. I understand the environment. I understand the pressures. And when I'm reading psychological research and literature, I can say, oh, this is appropriate for that situation. It really helps me mesh the two together.
So let's talk a little bit about mindset. And in your book, we'll talk a lot about, lawyering. I often say that one of my best friends, he's, been in law, and just knowing the backside of what his life is like he's up before us oftentimes when we go on vacation. This is and I'll say to him, how long have you been up? So he's like up before we get up and until the families get up. And then oftentimes when kind of people are winding down, he's working again. So, and I've been around them for 25 years. So I've seen that. And obviously in my professional career, I was able to work with lawyers in Ontario, developing the Ontario assistance program through a behavioral health consulting company that I work with. There's a lot of pressures in the legal field. And tell me a little bit about, kind of your interface when you were a lawyer, but what are some of the things in the new book that you're focusing on with some of the needs of lawyers?
Well, there are a lot of things, just in terms of being able to starting with being attuned to what's going on with you. How's that? You're not taught in law school to focus on what your internal experience is. It's very externally focused. And that can get lawyers into trouble because they don't understand that perhaps they're experiencing a mental health issue or even a physical health issue. They're just not attuned to what's going on with them. So beginning to think about, what's going on with you. And then once you appreciate that, you can do more in terms of self-care strategies. I think of your colleague. I wonder how much sleep he's getting, and maybe he needs education on how sleep might benefit him and how he might be more efficient with his work. Maybe he has no complaints and he's fine. But if he's saying to you, oh, Roxanne, I'm always tired, I can't seem to get everything done, maybe there's something about sleep in there that needs to be addressed. And then there are the workplace pressures, which include those long hours, the never-ending assignments, billable hour requirements, workplace culture and expectations. Sounds like your friend is a partner, but as a new associate, what are the expectations? There may be policies, but then there's the unwritten policies and expectations that everyone knows what they are, even though they're unspoken. And how do those affect associates? How do people treat each other? If there is an unhealthy behavior going on in the way people are interacting, does anyone step up in leadership and address that? I mean, there are a lot of pressures in that way. Then there's work-family balance. There's the issue of social support. I wrote an article for Law 360 a few weeks ago about lawyer loneliness. I mean, many lawyers feel lonely, but it's between the pressures of the profession and the tendency to not want to appear vulnerable, and the long hours, and a whole combination of factors. It's hard to connect with people when you eventually do have downtime at the end of the day, or if you try to take a vacation and things like that. Then there are financial pressures that aren't necessarily they could be work related. I mean, with the pandemic has created all kinds of pressures for people. But just simply, if there's someone with law school loans, I mean, a lot of people go to law school now and incur a lot of debt, and now they're practicing and they say, well, how does this salary going to pay these loans? And so this financial stress just adds another layer of stress to everything they're experiencing in the profession. You need to have a sense of meaning in your life. I'm giving you a whole laundry list here, but we all need to have a reason to get up in the morning, have a sense of meaning and purpose, and why am I, what's getting me through each day? It could be your work, it could be being a part of a team, it could be something external to work, it could be your family, your spirituality. And I don't know, that's a few things.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I can tell you that based on the data that when I would look at the trending of some of the legal people, the top issues were relationship and addictions. Those were the top two issues that we saw, again, which would make sense. So here we're talking about mindsets, right? Like you said, you're going through law school, you're going through a lot, obviously you have to be able to be, be able to keep up with studying and articling and all those things. And then you said you're externally focused. So you're getting, how many ever years you go in, and then you start off in the law firm where you're just kind of doing what's expected of you and meeting clients' needs, not really thinking internally. So I would think that mindset was something that you could really tap into with lawyers, because I'm thinking you've been a lawyer, so you understand. And now you're a psychologist that's really kind of, it's, one's from the outside in and the other one's from the inside out. So kind of having them look at that frame to understand, well, where do you want to be? Does that become a difficult space? A lawyer that wants to keep a practice or be part of partner track, but also, step into the concept of work-life balance. Right. How difficult is it to kind of meet those, those mindsets together or blend them?
Depends upon if they own the practice or they are one of many partners, right? So if it's your practice, you really have a lot of autonomy to decide how many hours you'll work, what cases you'll take on, when you'll work, where, all of that. I think as firms get larger, it's now you need more people on board in terms of how is this firm going to operate? And I think that's where some of the challenges are. In terms of that mindset, you're right. I think one of the things that helps me in talking with lawyers is I do get it, and I can speak to them in a language that helps them understand that I understand their experience, but there still is another way. You can actually think about other options, and there's no one size fits all to any firm, as you know. it's really talking to an individual and seeing what their needs are and building from there, or talking to, if it's a larger firm, talking to the group and what are your goals? Why are we even talking? So what are the pain points? Why are we talking? Okay. And what are some options that we can do to deal with this?
Of course, and absolutely. If it's a small firm versus a firm, say on Bay Street in Toronto here, it's a different kind of, what kind of firm is it? So in your book, tell us kind of what kind of things, if in the legal profession, can people expect from the book? What are some of the things that you explore that, say, lawyers or firms that are listening to this podcast or leadership teams in law firms would get out of the book?
The book starts out with explaining, why we should even care. Why do we even care about wellness or managing stress or healthy work environments? Why do we care about this? And so it makes the case for that. It talks about how to start to focus on, as an individual, internally on what's going on. It addresses self-care and well-being strategies and barriers to them, such as stigma or time. It talks about a lot of these workplace issues and how to begin to think about them differently. I ask a lot of questions, challenging the reader to think about how, what does this mean to you? What are your goals, your values, and helping them think through some of the issues themselves related to their work and their policies.
Yeah. So you in reading the overview of the book, you talked a little bit about the pandemic and how it affected the legal kind of landscape. Can you share a little bit about how it impacted the legal profession?
Well, a few different ways. One is certainly it raised awareness about mental health. And I'd say, like, just before the pandemic, law firms, at least here in the US, there were more, well-being officer type positions being hired. We were seeing more and more wellness committees. Firms were bringing in speakers. But when the pandemic hit, there were just so many pressures. Either in law firms, they might have been beyond busy and couldn't manage all the work, like M&A work. And then smaller firm practitioners were struggling because they didn't have enough work. Courts were closed. People were dealing with remote technology, childcare shortages. So all of a sudden they're working from home in a small apartment and their kids, 2-year-olds running around. And so there were a lot of pressures that compounded what was already a stressful profession. And law firms just had to take note that, lawyers were burning out. And so it certainly raised awareness, and I'm hoping that will continue.
The one thing that I was cognizant about is when we would do trending reports is that oftentimes the stigma in the legal field was that, and you tell me if this makes sense. And I remember it would be like, well, yeah, we know we have some concerns, but it's really not that bad. That was something that we would see. It would be like, yeah, we understand, but lawyers are very smart people, and
Right.
they can figure it out. So I just wonder if you could chat a little bit. And I would often say, yeah, they're smart people, but if they're smart people that aren't able to recognize that before they get insomnia, or before they're maybe having the extra scotch or two, or before they're, maybe, burning the candle at the next end where they're taking that extra call, they're often no longer at short-term stress. Then they kind of getting to the point where it's cumulative stress. And
Right.
then, they're taking something, get up, something to go down, but they're
Yes.
maybe having more conflict at home, and they're not seeing their teenagers who really need them. There's a lot of things that start to happen,
Right.
so it's a difficult space in that the backdrop of the legal kind of community was, oh, it's not that bad.
Yes, I think there's a tendency to minimize, right, what you're experiencing, and perhaps again not tuning in. And you're right. You need to address a problem early on. It might be a minor issue, but if you address it early on, then it doesn't become a bigger issue. The issue of substance use, that is a big problem in the legal profession. It's an easy way to go out and unwind, right? You're too busy to plan anything, so people just go out to happy hour or go out to probably far beyond happy hour by the time they get out. and have a drink, and it's a way to unwind. It's an easy way to unwind. The problem is it can become a habit, and suddenly, one drink isn't enough. And like you said, you're drinking to go to sleep, and now your body processes it, and now you wake up earlier, you don't sleep well, and now you're tired the next day, and so you have to take something else or drink a lot of caffeine to have the energy to focus that day. I feel like you mentioned a lot of different issues, so I went off target on the substance, but substance is an issue. But the legal community hasn't thought about it as one. They see substance use as separate from mental health, even though many people self-medicate with it, and then it can become problematic.
So they see it as completely separate. So they see it as something that's not related to mental health. They see it as just something that people overuse to maybe cope, but not
Right.
that like a comorbidity between mental health and substance use. I would say misuse. And we know addiction can be a smaller subset, but obviously I would say through the pandemic, regardless, whoever you were,
Right.
I know in Canada, I'm sure in the US as well, substance misuse was rampant, just
Right.
for people to cope. But, when we think about in the profession today, Traci, is it that people are starting to sit and look at it more from the space that, I'll say as a psychotherapist that, mental health is on a continuum. At any given point, any of us can be really mentally well, and all of a sudden we get misaligned, and then we can kind of get to the point where we're, it could be situational depression or more, I'm getting more anxious, and then all of a sudden I'm needing to take maybe a little anti-anxiety, or maybe, my doctor's starting to say, maybe you should try a short-term antidepressant or something like that. So it's all on a continuum. Would you say that the profession is starting to look at it more like that, or where's the education level in the field now around mental well-being?
I think it varies. I mean, certainly even with substance use, I think there's a greater awareness that it is tied to mental health now than as opposed to 20 years ago when I was talking about it. The continuum, yes. I think the thing is, I think a lot of people who are involved in the lawyer well-being community and lawyer assistance programs, they get it. But then it's kind of preaching to the choir. It's the people outside of that community that still need that education to understand that there is this continuum, and that people, your physical health, your mental health, they fluctuate. It doesn't mean that you have, an illness. It's just there are fluctuations based on things going on in your life.
And I think of the stigma, right?
Yes.
When we think of high functioning, I'm going to use the term, AA or AAA personalities. Sometimes they're drawn to professions like law, let's say.
Sure.
And in societal norms, I don't know if you would agree with this, what are they doing? They're hyper functioning, right? They are not showing the cracks oftentimes when it's later stage, right? So then they're really, really in trouble. So
high functioning,
yeah, they're high functioning, and they're like keeping it going. And sometimes you wonder, how do these individuals keep it going until there's a complete breakdown?
Right.
As a psychologist, when you look, what do you think would be a solution for something like that? You're saying that there's a lot more wellness committees or wellness personnel at firms now. Do you think that's helping, or do you think there's some other things that they should be considering about implementing in the different firms?
Well, I mean, some firms even have mental health professionals embedded within them or consulting to the firm. But I think the bigger issue is helping people to recognize when they need one and feeling okay in doing it. And that's the biggest hurdle. That's the biggest hurdle.
Yeah, of course. And I go back to that concept of the mindset that you're talking about, right? External versus internal. Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, we're all people. We have, and they happen to do their profession, and they're very good at it, which is, we need, you need people in legislature or, policy and government. And if you need a good lawyer for a criminal, you want that person to be on. So there's that pressure that we need good people to be able to kind of deal with those concerns. But the counter end is then, like you talked about a little bit about vulnerability. how is it then that person that is always supposed to have the answers, how do they then become vulnerable to be able to say, go see a coach or a psychotherapist?
That's very difficult for someone who's used to always being in control and keeps people at a distance and doesn't let anyone in to understand what's really going on inside of them, to share with you as a coach, or me as a coach, or as a psychotherapist. Yeah, that's very difficult to do.
Well,
But
I'll give you an example. When we started the program, this is, and we're talking quite a while back, goodness, probably 2002. And so I was the head of the program. I was running it as the executive. So now we were going from it being an external to being morphed into our behavioral health integration with the Law Society. So here now we're trying to, it's seamless. So we answer the phone. They feel like it's a part of their internal referral arm. The biggest concern, obviously, was we're talking about complete confidentiality, right? In psychological services. But guess what? The lawyers were always worried about.
Oh, yeah.
They were worried about, if I tell you something that was going to impact my practice. So we had to really parse out kind of the triage that we did with them so that they would be aware of that, or else they wouldn't even proceed.
Right.
So which was like, that was the first hurdle we went through. And then ultimately, I remember once, this is it was very telling to the program itself and what we're talking about. So I had someone find me, because they, through the entire system, they wanted to know who the executive was taking care of the account. And the first question they asked me was, what was my background? What gave me the credentials to be able to run the program? And then they proceeded, so it was two lawyers, by the way, two lawyers married to each other, and one of them called through. And the second one was, they didn't like the way the therapist was dressed. They didn't like the therapy office because it seemed too informal. And the approach that the therapist took was too informal from what they were expecting. So it's interesting. That shows you of an example of the issue with having to switch chairs to be able to get the help, right?
Right.
It was quite fascinating, actually.
And that ties into ideas of competence, probably. You have to, how do you present? You're formal, you're dressed formally, and that means that you're competent and you know your stuff. So the therapist who's dressed casually and has their dog running around in the office, or I don't know, I don't have a dog running around when I was doing psychotherapy, but the idea, they equate that with competence, which is not true. It's just a different way of operating.
So another level then as well, right? The difference in field. So I think of you with your being in both and be able to join both of them to help them recognize. So with this particular conversation, I had said to the lawyer that was calling, I said, so like, what is the person supposed to look like? I kind of challenged without pushing too hard. And they said, well, I just think they would have been a bit more formally dressed. Okay. And
a suit.
And then what was the office supposed to look? Well, I just don't know, but it didn't look the way I thought it should look. And we just chatted, just kind of, talking a little bit about, being able to be, it's hard to see a psychologist. It's difficult to enter, and, when there's concerns. I said, so, just like when you have your practice, and let's say you're a criminal lawyer, someone comes to you and they really allow you to use your expertise. I said, that's the space you need to enter the clinical office in. And then he or she, I think it was a man, the man said, oh, I get that. Not that he was going to go along with it, but so I think I can understand how tough it is at times, right? Because when you're the one that has the answers, generally in a profession, and when that becomes a big part of the person's identity, it becomes difficult then to kind of go to someone, even though they're struggling.
Right. And in that case, in the psychotherapist's office, they didn't know the rules. Like, what are the rules here? Everyone's casual, and how am I supposed to behave? And how do I, everyone's so open, and how do I, keep my poker face in here? It's very intimidating. until
Of
people
course,
get
and
comfortable with it.
in a courtroom, there's guidelines. There's certain ways
Right.
everybody's supposed to act a certain
Right.
way when the judge comes in, when those types of things. But in the therapy office, a complete different kind of scenario too. So I love
Exactly.
the concept again from like you said, external to internal, and then being able to kind of like you said, have the conversations about what they might need to develop within themselves. So what do you think? In our time, in reference to mental well-being and the legal profession, what do you think is one of the first things that law firms need to consider if they don't already have some things in place?
That's a good question. I think a wellness committee of some sort, where people get together and talk about what's going on in the firm and the client and the climate and the process. I think that committee should involve leaders as well as associates, because sometimes leaders have one idea of how things are going and associates have a completely different idea of how things are going, and get a sense of what's working or what maybe people would like to see change, and then think about what's realistic. What do people need? Do they need a little more autonomy? Do they need some flexibility? Do they need downtime so that they can feel rejuvenated the next day when they come in? And talking about those issues of client emergencies. You really need to answer a client at all hours. How are we defining a client emergency? There are a whole host of issues, as you know, that need to be addressed. But I think just getting people talking about them is a starting point, figuring out where are the biggest problems in our firm and where should we go from here?
Absolutely. So with your book, where you were saying that people can get it pretty much anywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles,
Yeah.
different things. If people are wanting to reach out, whether it's management teams for law firms, if people are wanting to connect with you to chat a little bit further, where could they get a hold of you?
A few different places. You can always find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest thing for people. My book website is thethrivinglawyerbook.com. And then I have a website. It's my name, Traci Cipriano, jdphd.com.
Awesome.
And,
well, Traci, thanks so much for your time. So what am I taking away? I think it's, at the end of the day, sometimes professions get, people, they spend so much time in their professions that becomes that I am a lawyer, I am a doctor, I'm a psychologist. And if you really haven't spent time developing that internal space, entering any profession, at times we do that learning when we're already in the profession. So with the legal profession, obviously, you kind of think like Traci said, it's external, being in control and doing a great job. We need them to keep doing that. But how do we do that based on the different types of environments that you are in the legal sphere? And how is it that you try to understand what are the needs of your environment, and listening to say, people are your commodity. They need to stay mentally well. And now that we're in I think the space post-pandemic, where we recognize there's a lot more things that we have not addressed, that we look at every profession and say, there's always going to be concerns, but how do we optimally prepare ourselves so that people stay really, really well? So Traci, thanks so much for sharing. And for everyone out
Thank
there,
you for having me.
Thanks for coming. And Traci, it's always a pleasure to talk and drill down even further into an area that oftentimes I don't spend time in. So thank you. And so for everyone, like Traci, I launched my book in July, the ROR, Return on Relationship, where we talk about resilience and their teams. If you're wanting a copy of that, it's on Amazon, but you can also go to my website at roxannedurhage.com and grab a copy. Again, thanks for tuning in, and Traci, take care, and so nice for you to give us your time.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannedurhage.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.